So I am the Senior Project Officer working on the Threatened Species Index at the Terrestrial Ecosystem Research Network, known as TERN, at the University of Queensland. So I finished my PhD in 2023. I conducted my PhD, or completed my PhD at ANU, which is in Canberra in Australia. I was based in the Sai National Park, which is in northeastern Cambodia. The park is about 55,000 hectares. It consists primarily of semi-evergreen and evergreen forest. My slides are going a bit funny. Apologies if things overlap the photos. So here is the park. So we do have a number of villages around the park. And first up, I'm going to talk about my first starter chapter of my PhD, which looks at the hunting pressure of primates in Sai National Park. And so just for some background information here, so given that there are a number of villages around the park, people in these local villages, they have high levels of poverty and they rely on the park's resources for their livelihoods. And there's also, that despite being prohibited, there is illegal logging and hunting as well. Alright, so part number one. So there are 6 species of primates confirmed in the park. This includes 2 species of langur, 2 species of macaque, 2 species of langur, the northern yellow cheek-crested gibbon, which is a small ape, and the pygmy slow loris. Just to clarify that there has been a taxonomic change. It's working now. With the pygmy slow loris, so as of 2025, they did split the pygmy slow loris into the southern pygmy slow loris and the northern pygmy slow loris, but at the time of my study, it was the pygmy slow loris. Unfortunately, in the park, there has been a number of declines in these populations, particularly the long-tailed macaque. So the macaque was captured for captive breeding programs for biomedical research and exported to China and the USA. In 2011, there were 2 studies conducted in the park in a number of villages, and they found. Can I switch microphones on? It's okay? Okay, it sounds like playing out.
For you, is that okay?
It's okay? Okay, cool. And in 2011, they found that people were targeting the pygmy slow loris for traditional medicine and for income. And in the past, people were targeting the long-tailed macaque and also the gibbon for the pet trade. And the number of pygmy slow lorises has declined at the time of the most recent surveys in 2010 and 2012. Alright, so in this study I had a number of research aims. Today I'm just going to be focusing on these 2 here. So we went into a number of villages and we wanted to know which primate was being hunted the most, why were they being hunted, how were they being hunted, and which one was most in demand. We also wanted to know which primates people wanted to buy the most. Okay, so to answer these questions, I spent 3 weeks in the villages in 2017. We conducted semi-structured interviews in 5 villages. So 2 of these consisted primarily of Lao people, and 3 were Quebec people, primarily. And these 5 villages were surveyed previously in 2011 as well. And just to show you that this is where the villages are, just around the border here, within 10 kilometres of the park. Okay, so our participants, so they needed to be the primary resource collector or the head of household. They could be male or female, but were typically male. Participation was voluntary, and we also used snowball sampling. So this means that people recommended others for the survey, and also because we had only 3 or 4 days in each village, we wanted to survey as many people as possible. So we asked a series of questions about general hunting practices. Do they consume bushmeat? And then primate-specific questions. So why do they hunt each species? Which ones do they hunt, and so on. We also showed pictures of each species to aid in correct identification of each of those species. But during our pilot study, it became clear that people were referring to 2 types of loris: the confirmed pygmy slow loris, but also the Bengal slow loris. And this was consistent with the 2011 survey as well, but it hasn't actually been confirmed by field surveys. But moving forward, we just describe the morphological differences between the two lorises. Okay, so out of our 96 participants that we interviewed, 61 of these were current hunters, 29 were ex-hunters, and 6 were non-hunters. So out of the 61 current hunters, 23 of these people currently hunt primates. Additional 23 current hunters or ex-hunters hunted primates in the past only. So we found that the pygmy slow loris is hunted by the greatest number of current primate hunters, as all but one of the current primate hunters hunt the species. The Bengal slow loris is being targeted, but less often, by a lesser number of current primate hunters. We also found that in the past, the macaques and the langurs were hunted by a greater number of past primate hunters, and this is different to the present. And a number of participants said that they used to hunt the monkeys when there were commercial guns available. So this, during the Khmer Rouge, there was commercial guns widespread throughout the area, but then in the 1990s, the government went through and confiscated these guns and destroyed them. So that's why, one of the reasons why I conducted this study too, because we've known there was an increase in homemade guns. And a number of participants said that they had used guns in the past. So why do they hunt each species? So we found there was a difference between the reasons for hunting the monkeys, so the langurs and macaques, and the gibbon, and that was primarily for food, whereas the loris, most people hunt them for income. So what methods do they use? So there was a difference again between the monkeys and the apes, small apes, and also the lorises. So most people use either these methods or a combination, so dogs, traps, knives, or other, whereas for the lorises, they use traps, crossbows, slingshot, or by hand as well. And just to point out that lorises are nocturnal, so people hunted them at night time, whereas the rest of the species are diurnal, so they're hunted during the day. A small number of people did say that they did use homemade guns, particularly to hunt the lorises. We also asked people whether they'd be willing to keep these primates as a pet, and if they'd done so in the past. And we found that no one had kept a loris as a pet in the past, but some people had kept monkeys. Many of the participants also were willing to keep the monkeys as a pet, particularly the northern yellow-cheeked crested gibbon. While we were in the villages, we did come across 2 pigtail macaques that were being kept as pets, but people said that this wasn't intentional, that it was being captured in traps left for wild boar. So in the previous study in 2011, participants thought that many of the primates, so all 6, had actually declined in the previous 6 years, and so we actually asked the same question. And promisingly, so most people, between 66 and 77%, thought that the monkeys and the gibbons had actually increased in the last 5 years. 35% thought that the pygmy slow loris had declined, but 65% weren't sure. They didn't know for the Bengal slow loris, and people said that they just hadn't seen it. So we want to know, for those people that still go into the forest, what would they do if they saw these primates? And many people said, so over 95% said for the monkeys and gibbon that they would actually ignore the monkeys and gibbon. Whereas for the pygmy slow loris and the Bengal slow loris, between 40 and 45% said they'd actually hunt them. And this number is actually greater than those people that said they hunt these species, which shows that they're actually being opportunistically hunted as well. The reasons given for not hunting other primates, so those current primate hunters who said, why don't you hunt other primate species? And many people said that they don't have equipment. Other people said that they simply do not eat primates. So overall, we found that the pygmy slow loris is the most hunted primate in the park. It's also the most in demand. So people said that people will come from, buyers will come from Bangalore, the Ratanakiri province capital, and also Bansai to purchase level picking slightly worse, and this is for traditional medicine. And so this study is also, we showed that there was actually a move away from hunting of the long-term macaque, but I just want to point out that this study was conducted in 2017, and there's been reports that following COVID, there were long-term macaques captured from the park again and placed into captive breeding facilities for biomedical testing. So it's really important that we do follow up this research. But it is promising though for the monkeys and the gibbon. However, it's important to note that there was more hunting when commercial guns were available, and therefore if the commercial guns become available again, hunting may increase. Alright, and next up is part 2. And this is looking at the density and population size of the northern yellow-cheeked crested gibbon. Okay, so as I said, the northern yellow-cheeked crested gibbon, this is a small ape, and the Sassenpain National Park has one of the largest populations of this species in the world. So gibbons, there are 20 species, and they're territorial, arboreal, and this particular species is endangered and was only described in 2010. This species is found in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, and it lives in small groups, usually consisting of 2 adults, male and female, and their offspring. Okay, so with primates, a typical method to survey them and estimate the population size would be by doing blind surveys. However, gibbons are hard to spot, they're arboreal, and it's hard to see, so we actually use their loud calls that they produce. So most of the species do produce duets between the male and female, and this can be heard up to 2 kilometers away. For this species, it can be heard up to 1.5. And so this, actually, I'll see if this will work. I'm just going to press. Okay, so this is the call. So that was the male, and then the female, and the offspring actually join in with the female as well. And so we use those calls to estimate the density of gibbons, and they did this in Sassenpain National Park in 2010, and they estimated that there was 456 groups. Unfortunately, since that time, illegal logging has continued in the park, and this is primarily large trees targeted for export to Vietnam and China. But we don't actually know how that's impacted the density of gibbons. Right, and we have found that different primates are impacted differently. The impacts of logging is different on different primates, and it's also site-specific and species-specific. But research has shown that arboreal species are more typically affected by habitat disturbance. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of these aims today. Sorry about the formatting, it's changed a bit. But we're going to discuss the density or population size of the Damascus sinensis, and we use acoustic spatial capture methods. And we're also going to discuss the relationship between gibbon density and different environmental variables. This has been shown to impact the density of gibbons. Okay, so to conduct the auditory surveys, I did this in 2019. I went to the same 13 sites they did the previous survey, at the previous survey at the park. So these were located 4 kilometers apart. We had 3 listening posts in a linear formation like this, about 500 meters apart. And as I said, we should be able to hear gibbons 1.5 kilometers away. We commenced these auditory surveys 30 minutes before sunrise because this species typically call for 1 hour, so 30 minutes before sunrise and 30 minutes after sunrise. So we stayed for 3 days at each site, and basically so there'd be 1 person at each of these listening posts, and we'd record the gibbon calls that we heard. We'd record the start time, the stop time, whether it was a solo call from a male or a duet. We also estimated the distance in categories here, and also took the bearing. And so if all works well, this is where the projected location would be for that group. But there are hills and lots of mangroves, so it didn't always turn out that way. Alright, so this is the sites from the previous survey when the park was a conservation area. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to that particular site because of dense bamboo, but we got within 1.2 kilometres of the centre of the signpost. Alright, so also to assess logging, and we did this by completing a number of transects, so up to 500 metres transects at 6 locations. So essentially, we randomly selected the central starting point on that central line, and then we had 3 people, 40 metres apart, and we all went west, and we'd look for logging. And then when we found it, we would actually record a number of different parameters, so the species, estimated felling time, and so on. And this is within a 2-kilometre radius of that central point, so a central listening point. And then, just checking the time. And then, so before we went into our proper analysis, we also had to identify the different given groups. And so we did this by mapping the different groups that we heard based on those distances and the bearing. As a general rule of thumb, that groups located 500 metres apart are considered different groups. However, it's important to factor in other variables as well, such as the start time and stop times for each duet. Another important one is the overlap. So if groups are calling at exactly the same time, can't be the same group. And also different characteristics of each group. Alright, and then we use the acoustic spatial recapture method model using the package IES2025. And this estimates the density of gibbons calling on any given day at any location in the park. And so we wanted to include a number of environmental variables in this model. And so the variables are down the bottom, so forest type, canopy height, distance to logging, distance to villages, distance to the nearest river or stream, and elevation. So for most of these, we used online data that was available or data provided by Conservation International, which is our collaborative partner on this project. For the logging, we did use our log trees that we found, so 160 log trees. Right, so we identified 92 different given groups. The numbers varied at different sites, so between 2 and 14 groups at the different sites. And we actually had in our best fit model 4 variables. So canopy height, forest type, distance to villages, and distance to logging. Unfortunately, we couldn't measure logging throughout the entire park, and so when we were estimating the population size of the gibbons, we had to exclude that variable. So using our best fit model with 3 variables, we estimated that there are 389 groups in the park. So we can't say that the group has the population size has changed compared to 2010 because it is overlapped with these confidence intervals, but it's still one of the largest populations of the species in the world. Alright, and then part 3. Alright, so in another study, we wanted to actually look at the impacts of chainsaw noise on the gibbons in the park, because as I said, there's a lot of logging going on, and with logging, that means chainsaws. So gibbons can be affected by anthropogenic noise, so primates can be affected by anthropogenic noise, but there hasn't been much research done on gibbons at all. So this is important for conducting this study. So basically for this study, we followed the early habituated group of gibbons in the park. And we wanted to know, so what was the effect of chainsaw noise on the falling probability of Nomascus senamensis, and what is the impact of chainsaw noise on the activity budgets of the gibbon? Alright, so this group that we followed was called Group A, and this group has been the focus of an ecotourism program, and it's been followed and studied by researchers, and it's very habituated at the time of the study. So I conducted my surveys of this particular study over 2 fieldwork seasons. So a dry season in 2017, and then the subsequent dry season in 2018. And so we followed the group via full day follows or half day follows. So basically, we follow the group around, record chainsaw noise, and also record their behaviour. And so for the calling probability, we did this 30 minutes from before sunrise. We recorded the start and stop time of all chainsaw activity, and then this is the calling probability of that habituated group. We also recorded different environmental variables or weather variables, so fog, wind, rain, etc., as this has been shown to impact the calling of gibbons. For our analysis, we used a generalized linear model and drop-one function. So this is a single-term deletion process, and we had a number of fixed effects, as there can be different variables impacting the behaviour of gibbons. And so this includes study periods, so it's dry season, chainsaw activity, of course, temperature, rain, and so on. For the activity budgets, so we want to know whether the chainsaw activity impacted the activity budgets. So we followed group A on 138 days. We had an ethogram, so this has a number of behaviours, and the main behaviours were travel, feeding, social, self-grooming, resting, scanning, and other. We also recorded the chainsaw activity, so we did this by basic categories. So 1 was really loud, so within their territory. 5 was very far away, we couldn't really hear it. We had 2 sampling techniques. So the first one was scan sampling. We did this every 10 minutes, so basically we had 1 minute to locate each of the group members in that area. If we couldn't find them, it was just marked out of sight. We also had 5-minute focal animal sampling. So this is where we chose a gibbon, and we followed that gibbon around for 5 minutes, and also recorded the chainsaw activity. We did this, we rotated through each of the individuals within the group, and then I'm just going to show you what this looks like, some of the behaviours of the gibbon. So gibbons are quite hard to spot. They're very high up, and they move very quickly, and they flakeate. So very quick. So that's the female. What colour is that? Very fast. Just point out too that the dark coloured gibbons, the black gibbons, they're either the adult male or the sub-adults, because the sub-adults and juveniles will be black until they hit maturity. The female then will change to the yellow colour. Okay. Cool. So for our analysis, for the scan samples, we use a generalized linear mixed effects model with the binomial distribution, and we had the drop-one function again. We had a number of fixed effects, so very similar to the calling probability, but the chainsaw activity was binary, so present, yes or no. We also had a number of random effects with individual and time block, because there is natural variation in the activity of gibbons throughout the day, and this is to account for some of that. For the focal animal samples, we did a similar model, but it was a beta binomial distribution because the data was over dispersed. We also used the drop-one function. The chainsaw activity, this was categorized a bit differently into low or medium and high during that 5-minute focal. And so for each behavior, this had a different model because unfortunately we couldn't combine all of those behaviors together with all the fixed effects into one model. And again, we had the same random effects. I'll just point out too that another consideration was our study period, because an infant was born between the 2 study periods. So that could impact behavior as well. Okay, so for the calling probability, we found that the gibbons did call more often when chainsaw was absent. However, this was not significant. Out of the weather variables that we did include, the only significant finding was that the group A called more on days with low cloud cover compared to days with no cloud cover. And this is quite surprising because other studies have found that when there's heavy cloud cover, the gibbons don't call as much. For the results of the activity budgets, so we would have thought that if the chainsaw activity was high, that the gibbons would scan more, so they'd be more vigilant, looking at the surroundings, they'd travel more and rest less. We thought that if the chainsaw noise was low, so the intensity was low, that they may not respond, like no difference, because it didn't impact them. But what we actually found was completely different. We saw an increase in resting and a decrease in scanning. And this was both in the focal scans and also the scan sampling. And so we think that this may be happening because the chainsaw noise is distracting to the gibbons, because it is happening at the focal scans where they're rested more at the medium-high chainsaw activity and the low chainsaw activity. But I will point out that we did only have a sample size of 1, essentially. And so it'd be good to basically do further research in this using different groups, but unfortunately at the time there's only 1 who checked it. Alright, and that is the end of my talk. I'd just like to acknowledge Conservation International and my co-authors, and this research is supported by a number of organisations and some references. And thank you very much.